Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, your premier platform for real-time global insights. Well, as the remnants of Tropical Storm Faye move through parts of the northeastern United States, bringing much-needed rainfall there, we saw yet another trough sweep through the northwest, bringing in cooler weather and setting up an active storm track through the Canadian prairies. Heat built in the southern plains, in the Four Corners states, and California, but in the central United States, well, the animation you've been watching here of infrared temperatures shows us the powerful storms that raced from Minnesota through Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana, and then a second complex that was really centered right down there in Oklahoma. As these storms went through, they produced a lot of severe weather, including a lot of damage. And in the day on Sunday, we can now see in the visible satellite imagery here from midday through about sunset what the pattern is really shaping up to be. We see the broader trough that is extended into the northwest. Again, this is going to set up the active storm track through the Canadian prairies. We can see the broader ridge that is sitting down here over the Four Corner states and southern plains. And on the heat of the day and with the lift of the mountains, we saw quite a bit of convection, even some monsoonal-like precipitation coming into Arizona. The remnants of the storms that went blasting through the central part of the United States then moved into parts of the southeast as we watched the larger area of low pressure that is now what is left of Faye move through the northeastern part of the United States. Early this morning, thunderstorms still racing through parts of the north central plains of the United States and over parts of Oklahoma, and some left over here over in the Carolinas too. But overall, this was a very stormy last several days here. To put it down in terms of storm reports, I've got the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th storm reports here from the Storm Prediction Center. I want to focus in on the 11th and the 10th. We're going to start off on the 11th first, because on Saturday, Alex put this out here to the National Weather Service in the Twin Cities of some of these powerful storms that went racing from Minnesota through Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. So that thunderstorm complex there producing numerous wind reports, over 300 of them. And the video you're watching over there on the right is from southern Minnesota in a town called Janesville. Now, as these storms eventually evolved and went through parts of Iowa and Illinois, I want to show you a picture from Pontiac, Illinois. Jason Webster put this out just to show us how extensive some of the wind damage was in central Illinois and northern Illinois due to some of these strong winds here. This was a very, very common occurrence with that thunderstorm cluster, again, that went from Minnesota all the way to Indiana. It also contained some hail. National Weather Service out of Des Moines posted these pictures from the hail in Fort Dodge, Iowa. And then my former student, Zachary Chalmers, here in central Illinois, sent these to the National Weather Service to show us some of the 1.5-inch diameter hail that went through here, also causing some damage. Now, the other thunderstorm complexes that went through on the 10th in the north central plains also produced some very sizable hail. If we zoom in here on our map that shows maximum estimated hail size, I want to specifically look at this cluster of storms that went through parts of South Dakota near Rapid City and then through central Nebraska, because we saw some sizable hail reported there to the National Weather Service out of Rapid City, some of those stones getting up to be better than 3 inches in diameter. And in central Nebraska, Casey posted this picture of her corn that was just ripped to shreds here by some of this hail. So it was a very rough weekend in the middle part of the United States in terms of severe weather. But looking at where that severe weather also put down quite a bit of rainfall, this is our last 5 days of total accumulated precipitation. And when you look at this, you do see several locations that did get some very, very heavy rainfall. But there are some places on this map that we didn't see much. Specifically, I'm going to hone in on this area right in through here. I want to talk about the eastern Corn Belt and the scattered nature of those storms and look at how we've really missed out on the rain in this part of Texas. And while we did get some decent thunderstorms that have moved into parts of Arizona, this has been an extremely hot start to summer here, and we're waiting on the monsoon to really fully develop to bring in more moisture in that area. And finally, you can see the heavy rainfall that we did get out of Faye as the remnants track through parts of the northeast. So taking this map in and then adding it to the last couple of weeks, we get this map. So over the last 14 days, extremely stormy pattern from parts of Idaho getting through the northern plains of the United States and into the Canadian prairies, which unfortunately are not shown on this map. But look at the eastern Corn Belt. We do see a lot of hit or miss nature to the thunderstorms, and there are still pockets in there that are very dry. That extends down into parts of Virginia, North Carolina, where go back a month ago and we were talking about extreme flooding in those states. Southern Texas, after getting out of drought, we've now seen 2 weeks of very high temperatures, and I expect to see drought emerging back into this area. But look at these pockets in the Central Plains. This one here in parts of Kansas and Oklahoma, getting into parts of Colorado, and then again right in through here in parts of central Iowa and Missouri. So we're going to watch all of these areas to see how precipitation changes over the coming days. But before I get there, I want to talk about some changes we saw at the end of last week and over the weekend in terms of our model forecasts. Because you all know that the majority of the meteorological community last week was talking about, well, what the CPC was showing here. A broad sector in the mid part of the United States extending from the south central plains, Arizona, New Mexico, all the way through the Ohio River Valley up toward the Great Lakes states, where we were anticipating a lot of heat. In fact, excessive heat in through this area. But as you saw over the weekend, things backed off a bit in terms of how excessive this heat was going to be. And released on Friday, we saw this map come out from the Climate Prediction Center. Still showing heat and a lot of it, but no longer the extremities in which we saw in the forecast from last week. A lot had changed, but those changes were quite subtle, and I want to show you what they look like. So this particular map is a map I showed last week on the 9th. This was valid 0Z on the 9th, and it was giving us a 1-week forecast for this upcoming Wednesday evening. We were focusing in on two things. How deep was this trough going to be, and how large was that ridge going to be there? Because somewhere between the two, the front was going to exist. Remember us talking about that? Well, look at the differences now when we look at that same time period, Wednesday evening, and our next forecast updated cycles here. So in other words, the 0Z runs from today. This is now a much deeper trough sitting in the central part of Canada, and our ridge has flattened out quite a bit. So that means the frontal boundary is going to get to make its way farther to the south. That'll sit between those two features, and therefore that's going to change the temperature patterns through midweek, and it's also going to change precipitation. I'll show you that in a few moments. Then, back on the 9th, the 10-day forecast, which gets us all the way to Saturday evening, we had discussed this broad ridge that was going to extend from New Mexico and Texas all the way into the Ohio Valley, and what we anticipated to be very, very high temperatures. Well, it's still going to be hot, but look at the latest forecast now for this Saturday evening. That ridge is much smaller, and it's sitting over Missouri, and there's a much deeper trough sweeping through parts of the Canadian prairies where we're expecting that active storm track. And the big questions remain, is this ridge going to retreat back to the west with time, therefore allowing more Gulf moisture to inundate the eastern half of the United States, something that we had been talking quite a bit about. So to understand this heat stress, we're going to start looking at a new series of maps. My good friend Steve reminded me on Friday of a map that I should be producing for all of you. This is actually some research done by Elwyn Taylor, a mentor in terms of ag meteorology, and just an incredible man here that's done a lot of research into what stresses crops across the United States. So we know that the growing degree day calculation is based off of a low of 50 and a max of 86 for corn. And what Elwyn discovered was that anything above 86 can often be detrimental to a crop. Now, his research was very clear to point out that this is not for irrigated crop, but he calculated something called a stress degree day. This is adding up any degrees above 86 for any given day. Now, the map you've been staring at that I've been drawing on here shows you what that calculation looks like when started from April 1st of this year, going through the 11th of July. And I've color-coded in green all values less than 140. You see, Elwyn's research said that anything above 140 in the accumulation of stress for a corn crop, again, non-irrigated, starts to see a reduction in yield. So where has our extreme heat been? For the most part, it has been in the south central plains of the United States. Now, because I did this last week, I just want to make sure that folks understand that 2012 is not an analog year for 2020. It's not even close. Let me show you what happened in 2012. So this is the same time period, the 1st of April through the 11th of July. We had already surpassed that magical 140 stress degree day number throughout a broad sector of the middle and eastern part of the United States here. Now, I got some great questions about, well, what about 2011? So let's go back and look again at what this year's map looks like. So again, this is this year, 2020, through the 11th of July, and this is what 2011 looked like. So we can still see a lot of the heat centered in the southern plains, but it did extend across the southern United States. And so we're going to keep a close eye on how this particular map evolves, but I wanted to provide that comparison for you since I got some great questions about it. All right, so let's get into talking about temperatures, because today we do have our excessive heat watches and warnings that are out for parts of the southern United States. With the humidity that's in place and the temperatures going toward the triple digits, we're going to be seeing heat index values here easily above 110 degrees. This also extends down here into the southwestern United States, where we do have red flag warnings out as well. So what's going on with this pattern? Well, as I animate the next 15 days here of upper level heights, you can see broad ridging that extends from the Four Corners states over toward the Ohio Valley. But it is, of course, not nearly the extent of ridging that we saw. We also saw an active Canadian storm track. But the big questions that remain is, does this ridge finally move back to the west, therefore giving northwest flow through the Corn Belt and a lot of precipitation? That was another major model change over the weekend. So let's talk about it. Temperatures first. As we discussed, the frontal boundary that was moving through the Midwest this week is now making its way farther to the south, and on it we're expecting more precipitation. So you're looking at a map here of high temperatures today on Monday. Our heat is down in the plains, southern plains here, a lot of triple-digit heat here, but notice throughout much of the rest of the country we're not talking about highly anomalous temperatures. The frontal boundary, though, is right here. Watch as we go from Monday into Tuesday. You can see that front making its way much farther to the south, and we're going to talk about that severe weather that's going to come with it here in just a few moments. It then pulls through Wednesday and makes its way basically from Michigan through central Illinois and all the way down through parts of Kansas, where this is some cooler than average weather. Now, the triple-digit heat in Texas does extend into the extend out of Texas into the low 90s up into the Ohio Valley and through here. But we were anticipating these low 90s to extend much farther to the north. But with this vigorous front, that's what we got. Meanwhile, out west, temperatures rebound a bit. But as we get into Thursday and then into Friday, the bigger heat comes back on toward the end of the weekend in the midsection of the United States, where we now see triple-digit heat from Texas up and through Kansas and a lot of low to mid-90s spreading throughout the Corn Belt. This goes from Friday into Saturday and also into Sunday as well, as forecast by the National Digital Forecast Database. But as I said, the Canadian storm track is quite active. And we're going to see, notice this up here, we're going to be seeing more shots at rain coming through the Canadian prairies. I want to talk to you about when that precipitation is going to get there. Because over the next week, this is what is coming out from the National Weather Service, we can see throughout the midsection of the United States into the Midwest and the Great Lakes the potential for some pretty heavy precipitation. We're going to watch carefully to see how much rain comes into this part of Iowa. You saw that was dry. But notice the National Weather Service keeping to the south of this very hot and very dry, and parts over here in the southeast very dry as well. So we've got a very dynamic pattern that's setting up here. In terms of severe weather, today, on Monday, we're going to be watching from Minnesota going all the way back into Nebraska, Kansas, and Colorado. This is the main corridor through which we're going to watch storms fire up again today. We could also see some strong to severe storms that are across the southeastern part of the United States up the East Coast. But as we get our way into the day on Tuesday, you can see the main frontal boundary sitting right in through here. So Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin under the gun. But we will stretch this severe weather threat back into the Central Plains as well. And on Wednesday, where the frontal boundary lingers and stalls out from parts of Indiana and Illinois through Missouri, Kansas, and Colorado, we're going to watch for the strong to severe storms again. You can see the moisture transport today, and then again here on the winds on Tuesday and Wednesday as that boundary stalls out right in through this area, so that we're looking at wind speeds down there in the bottom. And also our fire threat here in the Four Corners states due to some strong winds today as well is elevated. Okay, let's get to the European model and watch these features unfold here. So stepping you back, I'm going to bring you through the day today on Monday afternoon and evening. Remember, we're going to watch right in through here Monday afternoon and evening for our strong to severe storms to erupt. We've got an abundant amount of moisture transport out ahead of this, and you can see the models picking up on that severe threat late this afternoon and this evening getting into the overnight hours. Well, that's our frontal boundary that's going to move in the day on Tuesday. Here it is, into Tuesday afternoon and evening right across this area. And it will be on Tuesday we're going to watch for the rainfall to be coming into Iowa that could potentially hit some of those dry fields in central Iowa. This is Tuesday night getting into Wednesday morning. Wednesday afternoon and evening, and that frontal boundary just slowly moves through here throughout the day on Wednesday and stalls out in this area. So again, I know you don't see precipitation in through here, but on Wednesday afternoon and evening, we're going to watch it right in through this area show up. Now that boundary doesn't make it much farther than that. And toward the end of the week, this is now Thursday afternoon and evening, getting into Friday. I just want to give you the setup here. As we work our way into Friday afternoon and evening, high pressure still sits over the Atlantic. Plenty of moisture transport, so a lot of hit or miss storms here getting into the eastern Corn Belt. But the frontal boundary stalled out. We see our next low pressure system for the weekend emerging through the Canadian prairies. See it there? And as it sweeps through, more chances of rain for parts of the Dakotas. And there are some places in the Dakotas that are dealing with a lot of flooding. But nothing at this point seems to want to shut down the Gulf of Mexico moisture transport. So as the heat comes on, it's coming on in a hot and stormy pattern as we progress through the end of this week and into next week. So speaking of next week, as we see the high pressure building, remember we talked about that big ridge that was going to be setting up, stretching from Texas over toward the eastern Corn Belt. Well, as it begins to retreat, we see ring of fire type precipitation around it, both in the European and the GFS. And you can see that this ring of fire precipitation is hammering this part of the country. That's an area we were very concerned about regional drought development. Where we have our more permanent drought development, we are seeing the positive feedback of that showing up with drier conditions in the southern and central plains of the United States. Are we finally getting some indications too that the monsoon's going to get going? Well, the European is advertising that toward the middle and end of July, yes, we could possibly be seeing that. So that's an important outlook here for week 2. What are our temperatures doing? Well, with that active Canadian storm track, we do see the cooler weather here with the triple-digit heat in the central plains and the 90s spreading within this corridor as we work our way into the 6 to 10 day forecast. And with that jet stream retreated so far to the north, the heat stays on, but the Gulf of Mexico, as we keep talking about, stays open. This is a map showing you low-level winds and temperature anomalies all the way out to day 10. So this is the 23rd of July, and I just don't see anything shutting down that moisture transport. So what are we expecting? In this corridor and through here, hot and stormy. You can see it both in the European over here on the right and the GFS on the left. And finally, with that northward retreat of the jet stream, for the first time in a while, I'm starting to see some above average temperatures for the Pacific Northwest as well. So let's go from there and talk about some bigger features here. I want to specifically hone in on what's happening in the North Pacific, where we still see our very warm conditions that stretch into the Gulf of Alaska. But La Nina right now just really can't get going here in the Central Pacific. In fact, those temperatures are now sitting back above average. Here's our average line for Nina region 3.4, which is inside of this box. The Indian Ocean is still quite warm, and we still see record low sea ice right here north of Siberia. So this means this jet stream is still quite far to the north, but I believe it's this heat in the North Pacific which is giving us this active Canadian storm track and not allowing the Gulf of Mexico to get blocked off, hence the very stormy pattern for parts of the Corn Belt as we move forward, while the heat and drought conditions set up over the south central part of the United States where they have been for quite some time. No major changes in terms of angular momentum. We still see that with the MJO stuck over in phase 1 and 2, the main momentum loss has been in the tropics, but we certainly don't see high momentum in the jet stream that's moving across the Pacific, for example. So this is why our jet stream pattern's a bit stagnant and a bit farther to the north. What's going on with the Southern Oscillation Index? Well, after the major dip here at the beginning of July, we've seen it recover, but it's nowhere near La Nina status. And the stronger trade winds that we are anticipating, I think, are still from the fact that the MJO has been stuck here for 45 days over in phase 1 and 2, but is trying to move out. This is that standing wave we keep talking about over Africa. Well, the good news is it's finally moving to the east. Slowly but surely over the next 15 days, we may come out of phase 2 over toward phase 3 and then do what the MJO normally does, which is over about a 6-week time period, move through all of its phases. We're going to watch it carefully to see if this is a major factor moving forward. Right now, in the meantime, though, with the MJO doing what it is doing and the way things are shaping up across the tropics through the next 5 days, National Hurricane Center isn't watching much in the tropics. And we can see in this animation over the last week that we still don't see a lot of easterly wave activity coming off of Africa, which would ignite these tropical systems that would race across the main development region in the Atlantic and then potentially impact the United States. So anything that could form in the near term, I think is going to form closer to the U.S. than off of Africa. Meanwhile, let's watch this again. I want you to specifically see the flooding that's happening here in this part of China along the Meiyu front. If you've seen some of the news reports lately, the flooding here has been quite intense. Meanwhile, north of that, in China's main growing areas here that are near Beijing and then over the north of the Korean Peninsula, we have seen some more regular rainfall and nothing in terms of extreme temperatures. Then finally, I just want to direct your attention here to Europe as we wrap up this forecast video. You can see here in this animation, I'll play it for you one more time. We have seen quite a bit of scattered showers and storms that have moved in and around parts of Ukraine and then into parts of the western Russian wheat belt. But as we take a look over the next week, sizable changes in terms of temperatures. We're cooling things down over here in parts of Ukraine and drying out parts of western Ukraine by bringing in wetter conditions here through the Russian wheat belt into eastern Ukraine. Again, this is an area that was very dry over the last month or so. So this is some critical rainfall moving through that area. Okay, we'll go wrap it up right here. I want to wish you all a great week. Look forward to talking to you each day this week. Have a good one. Thank you.